Hi, this is Steve Payton of Fukuoka JALT, welcoming you to our recording of the presentation given to us on December 5, 2020 by Justin Harris and Paul Leeming. The video begins just as I had introduced Trevor Holster, our program chair, to introduce our two speakers.
And obviously it's based on the task-based learning ideas that they'll be presenting tonight. So our two presenters are in fact founding members of the task-based learning SIG of JALT. They're both associate professors at Kendai University. So Justin is the SIG coordinator for the task-based learning SIG. And he has basically worked in Japan for many years at pretty much all the different levels of teaching in Japan. Paul Leeming is the program chair of the task-based learning SIG, and he's also an associate professor, sorry, an adjunct professor at Temple University, Japan. And they are the co-authors of On Task. So I'll hand over to them, and Paul and Justin, let's start.
Thanks. Let me just
okay, thank you.
PowerPoint back up.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that visible?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you do it, Justin, it's probably easier than in between. So thank you very much for inviting us to Fukuoka. I went to Fukuoka in 2002, actually. I had a great time at Dazaifu and things. But thank you, for the invitation to speak this evening. So with the title of the presentation, the ITOTIF Framework, which unfortunately we actually spent longer than we should trying to come up with a title that didn't sound, that was a bit clearer for this framework. But this is what we ended up with, for better or for worse. So developing the Willis TBLT framework for a Japanese context, that's what we're going to try and talk about today.
I am trying to go forward, but hang on, here we go.
Okay, cool, thank you. So kind of me, and as Trevor said in the introduction, myself and Justin have been involved in task-based language teaching for a long time, and kind of done a number of presentations talking about task-based learning. So there's going to always be in an audience, there's always going to be people who are experts, people who've read or know as much or more than we do. And there's also going to be people who've just come along because they've heard of task-based language teaching and they're kind of, what's that all about? They're interested in it. So we're going to try to sort of cover something for everyone, hopefully, during that. We're going to try and answer these questions. First of all, just to be clear, what is task-based language teaching? Teaching at Temple University has helped me to realize that a lot of people actually, there are quite a lot of misunderstandings about what task-based language teaching is. Then why it's a must for students in Japan. We're going to talk about that, and hopefully, obviously myself and Justin believe that very strongly. So just very briefly talk about why TBLT is such a perfect fit for Japan. But it's not perfect, no approach to teaching ever is. So we're going to talk about some of the problems, then introduce this framework and what is the ITOTIF, and then basically talk about how it actually works in practice. I'm going to be responsible for the most boring part of the presentation, where I talk about the first 4 questions, and Justin's actually, then I'm going to move on to Justin, who's actually going to do the fun part, where hopefully you see how this actually works and why it works and things. Okay, thanks. We'll hopefully have a bit of time for Q&A. So I don't know how easy this is. Regarding questions, if you feel free to put them up in chat anytime during the presentation. And depending on whether we notice them or not, we'll either answer or wait till they answer them at the end. So my idea was here to have a quick breakout room session. I'm not quite sure if I can't actually do that here, so that would be over to the administrator.
Yep, I've got that. I'm ready for that.
So what I would like you to do is I'm going to put you into groups of maybe 3 or 4 people, and imagine that you're there with a newly qualified language teacher who's come to your school or your university. They've heard about TBLT. You're just on the way to an assembly with them, and you've got 1 minute. They're like, what is it? What is TBLT? You've got 1 minute to explain to them what TBLT is and how it's different from other approaches to language teaching. What do you say? So if possible, Steve, if you could put people into breakout rooms of 3 or 4 people, for preferably for about, I was thinking about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, should we say?
All right.
And I'd like you guys just to talk about this question, try to come up with a succinct explanation of what TBLT is. Afterwards, I'll open the floor for people to give their suggestions of this. So yeah, if you're ready, Steve.
Yep. Okay. We've got rooms of 4 and 3. So I'll open up. Shall we say 3? We'll say 3 minutes, and I'll set a countdown timer and let you know how much time we have left.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Breakout rooms.
Okay. Thank you very much for doing that. That was helpful, Steve. Thank you very much. Felt a bit weird to be like one of my students there for briefly in those breakout rooms. Good for me. So Justin, could you share the PowerPoint again, if you could, please?
Come on, hang on. You can see that, right?
No.
What? Are we not share? Oh, maybe I have to screen share again.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Oh, I see. I thought it would just be. Hang on, we'll get there. Breakout room.
There we go.
Okay. Breakout room.
Okay, we can see this now.
Good.
So it was interesting. I was in a breakout room, and basically it uses tasks is the obvious thing. It's task-based learning, so using the name. But a way that we have often tried to sort of explain the simple conceptualization of it is that task-based language teaching begins with meaning and goes to form. The primary focus of every class, of every interaction, is on the meaning of the language. The difference from a standard approach is the way that helps me to understand this is the way I learned French in high school was, today we are going to be studying, and I hate to speak French actually, we're going to be studying the verb être, to be. Je suis, tu es, il est, nous est. I can't, nous sommes, vous êtes. So it's a long time ago, but we did that, and the whole focus of the class was the form. The form. How do French people actually use that? What does it mean? What does it actually mean in terms of communication? Was something that was dealt with afterwards. The first primary thing is getting that form, getting that structure. So in the traditional this is a pen example, you're focusing on very much the meaning of each of those words, not the conceptual idea of when you would actually say this is a pen. So it's very much a focus on form, and TBLT is very much this focus on meaning. Another thing that came up in the discussion, yeah, this is good, thanks, Justin. Another thing that came up in the breakout room I was in was that there are extremes here. There are people who are purist TBLT. There are people who are a lot more TBLT mixed with other things. So there isn't really necessarily even a single agreed upon definition, but what most people agree on is this. Some old news. It's from Rod Ellis and Madsko Shintani's book in 2014. And Skian, Long, all the big names in TBLT would pretty much agree on this. And I found this to be really a useful teaching tool at Temple as well. So the primary focus is on meaning. That's the main, the central element to it. There's some kind of gap. We talk for a reason. We talk to find out something. We talk to express opinions, to find out what other people think. There's a gap in communication. When I say, how was your weekend? The gap is, I don't know what you did this weekend. If you'd already told me what your weekend was, you'd be like, well, why are you asking me about my weekend? So there has to be this gap, this information that one person has and the other doesn't, whatever form that is. Learners primarily use their own linguistic resources. There's a bit more, a wider range of opinions for this, but basically, I don't tell the student what to say. Say to him, I went shopping. Okay, repeat, tell your partner you went shopping. I went shopping. I bought this. The students can use whatever language, and this includes non-linguistic resources, to complete the tasks. There's no, this is the language I want you to use today. The other important, the fourth element is this non-linguistic outcome. What does that mean? It means the task should have an outcome where you can say, so what did you guys decide? What did you guys achieve? So very easy when you think of an ESL setting. The task is to buy a ticket for the train. Did you buy the ticket? That's the outcome. The outcome is that ticket in your hand. In opinion tasks, talk as a group, decide what's the best restaurant in Osaka. The outcome is this decision that the best restaurant in Osaka that is the outcome. It's not linguistic, it's a place, it's a name, go there, enjoy the food. So that is the non-linguistic outcome element of tasks. Why are tasks so good for Japan? And why do I honestly believe really strongly that it's such a good approach for our students? I teach in university. I've taught at all levels, and I've generally found the same thing. At various levels of university in Kansai, high school, there's a good level of metalinguistic knowledge. Entrance exams, and they were mentioned just before, love them or hate them, you need metalinguistic knowledge to pass those exams. You need a fairly decent vocabulary, and you need a good knowledge of grammar. You need to be able to read. What you don't need at all is to be able to speak generally, and you don't need to be able to use that language. You need to be able to know the grammar of English, and you need a good vocabulary, and our students generally do. So they have this good knowledge, a lot more than they think they have, but with that comes low levels of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is this belief, yes, I can do this, I can do English. Where does that low self-efficacy come from? It comes from entrance exams that are ridiculously hard, where often people are aiming for averages of 50%. That means an average student only knew half of the information on the exam. And also this general discourse in society, as Trevor said in his introduction, I've been here for 20 years and heard, 英語は難しい。日本人は英語できない。なんで日本人は英語できないやろうな? Why can Japanese people not speak English? Why is English so hard? Why are we so bad at it? So you've got that. Coupled with the third thing that I've found, again, at most universities, that this isn't all, is this low levels of motivation. Why? You pass the entrance exam to university to study chemistry, and suddenly you're told you've got to take 2 more years of English. But I don't want to study English. My major's chemistry. Okay, so I've got to pass these classes. Okay, I'll do that. So you've got this low motivation with a lot of students. You do have English majors, you have very highly motivated students often mixed in with these classes, but generally these are 3 elements that I've found in lots and lots of students in Japan. So why is TBLT perfect for these students? Justin, if you could.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, oops, nearly went to sleep there.
He's nodding off. A good sign. If you're nodding off. So what does TBLT do? TBLT provides students a chance to use the language that they have. Students have never been given a chance to use this language. If the teacher tells them the language before the task, they don't know. Did I know that language? Could I have done it without the teacher? I don't know. He told me what to say. I said it. TBLT doesn't do that. There's no language provided. Therefore, the student goes, wait a minute, the teacher asked me to talk about my favorite restaurant, and I could. Whoa, wow, I actually could do that. I knew some of the words to describe food and okay. So they're given that chance to use that language, and they're given an opportunity for success. They're not judged on their perfect use of the past tense, of the third conditional. They're judged by, did you manage to decide what the best restaurant was, or at a more simple, did you manage to buy that ticket? Did you manage to order that pizza? Yes, you did. Well done. You achieved success. You used English for success. And you'll often hear this with students when they go abroad. One of the things they love is when they can negotiate a successful interaction and get the thing they wanted. Not with perfect grammar, but communication. So TBLT allows them to build self-efficacy, and it allows them to therefore increase in this feelings of success for tasks. The final element is TBLT gives them a genuine reason to communicate. You want a ticket, that's your reason. You need that. In a classroom situation, you've got to decide what's the best restaurant in Osaka. Talk about it, decide. It's personal. It's you talking about your opinion, places you've been to, but it's a reason to communicate, and often an interest, and hopefully Justin will show that interest later on with actual example. No, that's good. Yeah, you move me along, Justin, as you.
Yeah. We work together, so I'm used to.
Yeah, you're prodding,
pushing him.
Okay. I'll try and go. I won't be that much longer before Justin gets to be interesting. So some of the criticisms of TBLT: it relies on existing language resources. What if students don't have them? It's only useful for acquisition-rich context because there's no specific focus on language or on grammar. So it's fine in an ESL setting where students are getting language all the time. But what about contexts such as Japan, where students don't see English much outside the classroom, neglects a grammar focus? Another one is that you can't design focus on form materials in advance. You're supposed to react to what language the students produce and focus on those forms. And that can actually be quite challenging for a lot of teachers. And another one is that tasks are primarily focused on output, speaking tasks. That's what most people think of. And if you look at the literature, if you read papers on task-based learning, the majority of them are actually on speaking tasks. So in terms of these, Rod Ellis says that these are misconceptions generally. Most TBLT will have a focus on grammar. The lack of input of language is neglecting input tasks. And that's where the framework that we have created comes in. So you need language. That's the most important thing. Bringing up children in Japan bilingually, it's the input that's the main thing. They need to hear that language. You need that raw language data, as Carol says. Everyone agrees input is an essential factor for language acquisition. And actually, Ellis and Long would argue it's an essential part of a TBLT approach. And that comes through input tasks. One of a close friend of our SIG is Natsuko Shintani, who is now at Kansai University, who wrote a book in 2016. If you're interested in input tasks, a full length book on it. But basically, the idea is that if students don't have any language to produce and they're not in an ESL context, these input tasks require the students just to maybe move a piece of paper to respond to the input, but they're giving them language. It could be in the form of listening, or it could be in the form of reading. But input tasks are very much focused on providing students with the language that is so necessary for language acquisition. Maybe the next one.
Yep. It's a bit blurry, this one.
Yeah, it's old. Yeah. So all of this, I always recommend this book to any practicing teacher. If you want a practical guide to how to do TBLT, Jane Willis's Framework for Task-Based Language Teaching in '96 is one of the best books you can get. It's still available in some form. But yeah, an amazing book. But basically a task cycle begins with a pre-task, which introduces the topic. We'll have students, generally brainstorming, maybe even listen to someone doing a similar topic. Then it has the task cycle itself, which has the students engaging in the task. Then they plan together to give a report back to the group on what went on in their task. So going back to my restaurant example, the pre-task might be, what did you eat for breakfast today? How was it? Talk with your partner. Okay, we're going to talk about food, decide the best restaurant in Osaka or the top 3. That would be the task. The planning would then be planning your report back, and then the students would talk to the class, giving their top 3 restaurants and the reasons for that. Then, and only then, in the Willis framework, after that, the teacher would then focus on the language. Could be comparative language in this case. It's more delicious than, it's the best, it's superlatives, etc. But after the task cycle would come the language focus. Jane Willis and her husband, Dave Willis, wrote a book in 2007, and they give lots of examples of reading tasks, of listening tasks. So they do have this input. But what their book is generally standalone tasks. You read this task, it follows the task cycle. It's a reading task, so it's an input task. Okay, done. Let's move on to the next. Okay, we've got another task. This time it's a speaking task. It's a new topic. It's a new theme, etc. So what we did when we were coming up with the idea for the book is we developed the ITOTIF framework. If you can, did I say it right, Justin?
Who knows how to say it? Yeah.
So what this is in the same way that Willis and Willis 2007 will introduce a reading task, it follows the task cycle. So you'll have a pre-task, for example, read about, or it could be talk about, the pre-task would be some kind of guessing game, often with a reading, where you'd have the students guess about what they're about to read. The students then read the task, and then there would be some kind of focus on language or strategy, schema activation. It piques interest. But what we did was, with the book and the framework, was we linked that then to the output task. So in a single unit of the book, and the way we would recommend doing this, with or without the book, with your own materials obviously is fine, is to have an input task where the students are provided with language. It follows the task cycle. So if you pop back, maybe it's, so yeah, if you could. So it still follows this cycle. The input task follows this cycle. The output task follows this cycle. So the pre-task might be, read this article, guess what you think the end of the story is going to be, for example. Then the students read, report back, did they get the right answer, did they guess? And then the language focus would be some language from that input task. Then, if you, sorry, could you,
Go back, yeah.
Back again. Then the output task would deliberately link to the same theme. So you wouldn't have, okay, we talked about restaurants, now we're going to talk about what you did last weekend. We're going to have a speaking task. If you've read about restaurants in the input task, the output task is going to be talking about the same thing. So it builds on it because it uses the same topic. It uses the input language that you've given to the students already. But because it's task-based learning, they're still free to use any language that they decide to use. And it feeds back in, and it actually works in a cycle. There's a reference there to a paper, which maybe while Justin's talking, I'll try and find that and pop it up in the chat, a PDF. We published a paper on this, which feels like it was a lot clearer than my ramblings tonight. So I will put that up in the chat. But basically, that is the idea. As I said at the start, the best way to actually explain any of this is to actually see it done. So hopefully, Justin will now make some sense of what I've talked about. Over to you.
Very clear, Paul. Yeah, so I'm going to basically just give an outline from the book that, book series that we put together with Alan Abax called On Task. Just before I start, I'm going to be comparing as I go along our approach with what we would consider a traditional approach, and it's going to sort of sound like I'm criticizing the traditional approach, maybe I am actually, but that's only our own personal opinion. We like TBLT as an approach. We've found it to be rewarding for students for the reasons that Paul outlined, but it's, I mean, we're not saying this is the only way. I should preface that before I start. Anyway, one of my hobbies is making dumb things, and one thing that I made to sort of explain this was I imagined a traditional approach textbook by a sort of a major publisher, and I called it Lift Off. And I used all of the catchphrases that we tend to hear a lot these days: 21st century task-based global skills for developing autonomy and critical thinking. I just tried to throw everything into this cover, and I liked the sort of feeling, lift off, your language will go sky high in no time, kind of thing. And I could imagine this kind of book if I walked around the JALT conference and around the publishers, I could nearly imagine seeing this book. And then I imagined what would be in it. And that was a lot easier because for many years I was working in various universities, and I was being given textbooks that I had no control over. Sort of a story for most people working in universities in Japan, but they all tended to follow the same outline, and it just seemed to clash with my natural feeling for what I wanted to do. So I was finding myself twisting that around all the time. My whole life, working life, was spent twisting the book around, trying to make something that I was felt comfortable with. And the outline was something like this. And this is a typical unit in Liftoff, which doesn't exist, by the way. I should just clearly, this is just my imagination. There'd be a target language area where the target language is presented. It might be a vocabulary activity, or it might be a listening activity. Then there would be a grammar practice section, usually part 2, where you would practice the grammar. There'd be a restricted language use section. This would be using the grammar in some sort of context, but it would be restricted. You might like put extra words in, but and to sort of make it personalized, but it would still be quite restricted. And then there would be what might be called a task. And some of the more recent books like this would actually use the word task and actually try to pass themselves off as a task-based approach because it's popular, you know. But a lot of the times it was, and a lot of the times it was actually a good task, but it would be sort of pushed to the back, relegated to the back of the unit. And then finally, there'd be a reading input at the end of the unit. Now, invariably, and I'm randomly pulling a number out of my head, but I'm thinking 95% of the textbooks that I used, I might not have used 10, but anyway, a lot of them, would have a reading at the end of the unit. And basically the way I see that these textbooks had been created was that it was in a presentation, practice, production format, PPP, for most people will be familiar with that, I imagine. And it's no secret that this approach is pretty handy for publishers, and it's pretty handy for teachers, because it makes creating materials pretty easy, and it makes controlling a class pretty easy. You're in control. I'm going to give you the language. I'm going to make you practice it, and finally, I'm going to make you do something. And so it's a nice teacher-controlled approach that makes it easy, and it sticks. It's been around for a long time, and it shows no sign of abating. I don't know what the reading input is. I don't know why they put that at the end, but that's always there. And so what I found myself doing for probably 15 years is I would always start with either of those, the top or bottom things. Sometimes the target language at the start was quite handy, especially if it was listening or something, quite handy. The reading input sort of activates some sort of discussion about or thinking about the topic in general. And then I'd go straight to the task and get them to do that. And then I would do the grammar practice and the restricted language section, which is what I felt would be a good post-task sort of activity. And I was doing this for years, and I was always complaining about it. And often textbooks would change. You know, administrators love saying, "No, we're going to use this book now." And so then I'd change, and I'd complain about it to Paul. And then we decided, well, why don't we, do something about it? And so that's where our sort of our book idea came from. The reading input at the back was kind of key. And actually, I don't actually want to show you that slide for too long, because this is, actually, I'm going to show you that slide, but don't read it if possible. Not yet, you can read it later. But basically, this is how one of those books would do a reading task. It would have something like this. Part one would be talk to your partner, Have you ever had anything stolen, like sort of schema activation? And then it would say, now read the story and answer the questions below. And there'd be questions below. Now, these questions, this is a linguistic outcome. We're looking for the answers to those questions after before we've read it, really. And we're just searching the reading for answers to questions. We're just looking for language, very entrance exam style. So we thought, why couldn't that become the basis of a good input task? And that's what we used as the main sort of input task in this book series. This is a 3-level series, and I'm going to use one example from level 3, so it's sort of higher level. But this is how we sort of tried to deal with this sort of lack of language input to start with by placing it at the start. As Paul mentioned before, the input task follows a pre-task, main task, and then on the next page, post-task format. But rather than read the article and answer the questions, we tried to be a bit more tasky, if you like. There's sort of a warm-up. We always have this thing called a 1-minute speech where we deep end students and we get them to talk about something just off the bat. No thinking time. Doesn't matter how you say it, just say it, word, word, word. If you can't say something, think around it, say it a different way, which sort of is a nice little, that builds over weeks and weeks and weeks, and you get some quite good fluency development from that. But then we go straight to the input task. And this input task is about Brother Orange. Now, everybody's got their video off mostly, but maybe you can use that little thumbs up thing. Has anybody heard of Brother Orange in this group? Mickey's heard of it. And we've got some crosses. The publisher has heard of it. Steve's heard of it. Okay, not many people, which is good. I was hoping that most people wouldn't know. People who do know about this, I'm just going to ask you to kind of be quiet when we go to breakout room in a minute. What I'm going to ask you to do is be a student for a moment and do the little input task that we've got here. You're going to read about 2 people. Yeah.
I was just going to say, do you want to take a question now or later? It's about comparing PPP to TBLT.
Maybe later, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just because, yeah.
Okay, I got the. I'm looking at the chat, Al, and I got the question, and I have a response, but I think maybe later, if that's okay.
Right.
Yeah, just because, yeah, just since we're just about to go to breakout room. So you're going to read about 2 people, an American living in New York and a Chinese restaurant owner living in a small city in China. This is a true story, by the way. Another thing that we tried to do is stick only to true things. We don't want like, why does John go to the movies with Mary, sort of things. We wanted to keep it like real as much as possible. So this story is about how they met for the first time. Before you read, with your partner, guess how they met. And use the keywords in the box below to make a short story of how they met, then compare with other pairs. It's a pretty classic sort of TBLT task. And what we're doing is we're giving some sort of scaffolding here, not too much, but letting you tell the story as you might see it before you've even read it. Now, you've got a little bit of sort of hint information here. This isn't going to go with you to the breakout room, so just try to remember. Maybe if you've got a phone handy, just sort of take a photo of that screen, or if you've got a pen, quickly write down at least those key details. We don't obviously have a lot of time, so maybe, 4 minutes, something like that? Would that be all right, Paul, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
For 4 minutes, how did these 2 people meet? We've got this American chap. His name's we know his name is here because we've given that, Matt Stapera. He's from the United States. And we've got this Chinese restaurant owner living in a small city in China. How do they meet for the first time, even though they're living in different places? Here is some hint information. 4 minutes to give it a go. Break
All right.
start.
I'll send you all off into the rooms. Here we are. 4s and 3s. Here we go.
Now, we don't have a lot of time, but maybe just anyone got maybe one example? Anybody have a good example? Can't hear you, Al. I just think you're talking, but you're muted. I think everybody.
Alan, yeah, Alistair, your mic's closed.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say in my group, Jay Lake almost nailed it. Really close. Didn't get it perfect, but really close.
Bill's got his hand up, I think, as well. Is that your hand up? Is that what that white thing is on your screen, or is that just a prop? Bill Pello.
Bill, we had a pretty good. Bill, you've got it written down, do you, Bill?
Yeah.
Why don't you?
I couldn't get the end of the story.
Oh, wow. My gosh.
Dominic was talking too fast, but I just wrote happy ever after.
There you go.
He was in a bar at the airport reading an article on his phone. Lee Hongjin was looking at some photos and forgot his iPhone, and he thought it was stolen because when he went back to the bar, it was gone. But no, happy ever after. Okay, yeah. All right, nice. Now, the obviously, this is, we're trying to give you an example here rather than actually doing a language exercise within a JALT meeting. But I hope maybe that the interest might have been developed a bit. How did these two people meet? And what I've found with my students when we do this is you do get some pretty interesting stories. And it's seldom that the actual story gets found. I've had some pretty close ones, like perhaps Al's room today, but it's doable because you've got that scaffolding there, but it's still free because you're thinking about yourself. And then we've got a non-linguistic outcome when we come to read it, because we're not really just looking for the answer to a question. We're not scanning it just to find one answer. We've actually developed an interest in this, and we're going to want to know what this story's about. Very quickly, because we've still got a few slides, what happened was this guy worked for BuzzFeed. Actually, if you've got a spare 20 minutes later, it's a great story. It's on BuzzFeed. This guy worked for BuzzFeed. His iPhone was stolen. He got a new one, and photos started appearing on his phone of this guy in front of an orange tree. He couldn't work out why, but it was because of iCloud. The photos were still tied up. The phone had been stolen and sold in China, but it still had his iCloud details on it. So this guy's taking photos, not knowing that it's not a new phone. They're appearing on this American guy's phone. He writes an article on BuzzFeed about this weird thing. It gets picked up by Weibo in China, and they make him a kind of national celebrity. Who is this guy? Who's this guy? He comes forward, the Chinese guy comes forward, and it just becomes sort of national news that these guys have sort of been connected. So Matt takes a trip to China to see him, and he's suddenly on media, like TV shows and things, and he goes around China for a week, and they become best buddies, even though they don't speak each other's language. So it's a perfect sort of like nice happy ending story as well. Two people from different cultures who don't speak each other's language become ultimate friends, kind of thing. If you want to read the whole story, as I say, it's a BuzzFeed thing, or Elle could send you an inspection copy of on task 3, and you could read it, this little version of it.
I could actually give everyone digital access of it.
Oh, that's true. Actually, true. Yes, you could. Actually, when we came to make it, we wrote to, I think Elle wrote to Matt, and Matt sent us the photos.
Yeah, we got in touch with Matt, and I said, whenever you come to Japan, we'll buy you beer. So if he comes out, we can, I don't know, maybe arrange a meeting.
Apparently, there's a movie in the process as well. But anyway, so that's sort of the approach that we've taken. We're trying to get away from that linguistic outcome, trying to get interest in the reading before you read. And then there is a sort of a post task, which is sort of more linguistic. In this case, it would be a reordering of what happened in one of those kind of like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. And then what we've done is we've back of the booked language. We call it back of the booking, or I was thinking today we could call it bobbing, back of booking. But anyway, we put vocabulary. Yeah, I like those things. Anyway, we're gonna we put sort of like traditional kind of like that language stuff at the back of the book. It's there if you want it. If you really wanted to do it beforehand, you could. But we sort of like leave it to teacher and learner discretion, especially perhaps learner discretion. And then, as Paul mentioned before, there's the output task. Now, I didn't have to imagine very hard about what would be in liftoff regarding an output task, because I just used one of the old books that I used to be made to use. And I took one of their Unit 1 things, and I didn't take it exactly, because I thought I might get in trouble, but I just sort of redid it as it was. And this is how it was in the books that I had to use. The output task, there would be a task, but there'd be something like this: prepare. There'd be a grammar goal. The grammar goal would be WH questions. There'd be a list of questions, and you'd have to write what is your name, where were you born, when is your birthday. And then there'd be the speaking task, which would be asking those questions to 2 people or something. And I'm sure this won't be completely unknown to a lot of people here. You've probably seen this kind of thing in textbooks. Now, this, it's following that classic PPP thing. Again, I don't want to criticize too much, but to me, it just didn't seem to be that inspiring to students. They have, especially where we're teaching at universities, they've come through a lot of junior high school stuff like this and high school stuff like this. So it's like they've finally got to university, and then it's like, bang, here we go again. So again, book 3, sorry, a bit of repetition here. The output task, following on from Brother Orange. By the way, this is Unit 1, so it's kind of meeting people for the first time. I should have mentioned that before. The output task, still following the Willis framework, the pre-task, main task, and post-task. The pre-task is sort of languagey, but it's much more open. Write out 4 questions that you ask when you meet somebody for the first time. So it leaves a lot of freedom to them to be able to sort of, like just develop some questions. And then the main task, what we didn't want to do is force any language upon them, but you still need to give them something. So we've got this little, this is our task here, which you might find in any textbook, but it might be relegated to the end. As I said, this is sort of central. In this case, what they do is they're going to go around the class. First of all, they write their own answer for these things. When's your birth month? April. Where's your birthplace? Huntley. Anybody here from Huntley? No, I bet you. Huntley's a small town in New Zealand. Reason for studying Japanese, in my case, well, in English, but Japanese, I live here. Hobby, playing the guitar. Favorite food, sushi. Dream job, rock musician in the 90s. Now, what I do is then I go around the class and I ask those questions using these hints, but with my own language. I can use any kind of way. I might end up just saying birth month, perhaps, or I might know a little bit more, and I might say, when is your birthday? Or I might say, when were you born? Or what month were you born? And then they check every time they find somebody with the same answer. And then the idea is to find out how similar you are to the people in your class. Who is the most similar person, sort of tying up with that kind of meeting for the first time input task from before. And then there's a post task where they sort of focus a bit more on language, writing out how similar they are, what are similar points and what are different points. I found that a lot of people in this room were born in April, but nobody was born in Huntley. They are very different than me, kind of thing. I'm sort of rushing through because I'm aware of time, but basically that's the ITOTIF in practice. Again, I should have done this. Forgot about these slides, but more close up. But again, the language focus is put at the back of the book. Any sort of like focus on language that you might want to use. As Paul said, in task-based language teaching, language focus has to be reactive, but you can sort of guess what sort of language might be coming. And we spend a lot of time guessing what language might come out of tasks and then putting language at the back. But put side by side, you can sort of see the difference in the approaches. I've actually gone faster than I thought I would. Is that sort of clear? Have I gone over anything? Did I skim over? I was skimming over because I was worried about time, thinking I had lots of slides, but...
Can I, if you just end the screen sharing, maybe? Maybe, yeah. I think sort of, yeah, the language is there, but it's at the back of the book was the sort of, and again, there's a language focus, there's a grammar focus sort of in there. Just one of the questions that came up, Justin, as you were talking to Prawley was and I'll address it because I think it's a huge question, is are students not, and feel free, Justin, as well to chip in and add your 2 cents worth, but are students not more comfortable with PPP? And don't they want that scaffolding in the classroom? And for me, the biggest challenge, actually, comfort is a challenge. Anxiety is a very real thing in the language classroom. But the first challenge that I have with all of my classes is, are they actually going to do it? Are they going to engage with this material? Engagement's a huge thing now in our field, and it's the most important thing. Are the students actually going to engage and be interested? And the way Justin presented the Brother Orange thing, in the breakout room I was in, I was asked, so what's the story then? You want to know. You want to know what actually happened. Whereas the way the way Justin showed the slide with the simple questions before, have you ever had anything stolen? Okay, now read about this guy and answer the questions. Why? Why do I care? Why should I care about this guy? It's so boring. It's just like everything else. I'm a chemistry major. I said it before, I'm bored. But the big thing with this approach is it drags in the student. It gets them to go, I actually am reading, not because Justin's told me to, because I want to know, was I right? And for me, that's where TBLT over PPP maybe takes away a little bit of that comfort. And that's where the teacher being very understanding, not creating that relaxed atmosphere, and not hammering students if they're wrong and going, no, that's the wrong answer. But it's that engagement. It's with the materials such as Brother Orange, the students read because they care, because they want to know, not because I said, read this and answer the questions at the end. And it's like, okay, read and answer the questions. So for me, that's where TBLT maybe takes them a little bit more out of their comfort zone, but it makes them actually care and actually engage in tasks. Would you say, Justin, there's any?
I spent a couple of years doing quite a lot of like survey and interview studies with teachers from our SIG. And one of the things that nearly all of them said was that there is an adjustment period at the beginning of a class if you're going to be using a TBLT approach. There is an adjustment period where students aren't comfortable completely always. I still think that there's actually an immediate level of comfort a lot of the time, because it's just it depends. I guess it just depends on the class, but that perhaps you need to sort of slowly drip into it a little bit. But that once they're used to it, that they do seem to like take to it pretty well, was the general feeling from a lot of teachers using TBLT in Japan, which is where our SIG, of course, our members are.
Also, as been said, we're kind of flexible as well, I think. So if I, for example, had a reading that I thought was very difficult with some students, that vocabulary at the back, I might decide in this class this week, I'm going to give it them. I'm going to give them a bit of that language up front. I'm going to try and keep the integrity of the task to get that interest. But I'm going to try to sort of support the students a bit more. Again, class by class, student by student, I think. Another question.
Maybe you could answer Charlotte's first.
Right, isn't the TBLT better for who are often isn't the TBLT approach better for B1, A2 SEFA students level than A1, A2 students who are often unsure of what word needs to come next in a statement? Isn't it better to have something for them to refer to in a textbook? This is actually a really interesting question. What we have in the book is we have this thing, even in the lower level book, we have this thing called 1-minute speeches. And there's lots of teachers, no way, you ask an A1 stroke low A2 student to speak for a minute? Great reaction from students. Again, the task Justin showed there, although it's in a B1 book, at the very, very low level, I've done tasks like that with junior high school students. I used to teach in a junior high, Chusan, and you'd get kids going around going, July, birthday, July, you, and the other kid goes, August, you, birthday. What you've got there is single word communication, but you've got kids actually engaging, and that's real world. When I speak French, you heard my French before, that's what it would be like. It'd be like, well, I can't, but it starts with that single word communication. And that's where TBLT is actually, it doesn't matter. It gives those beginner learners that ability to use the language. Then afterwards, you can say, okay, do you know how to say, when is your birthday? And the fact that I'm sure everyone in Japan, it's easy for us, we live in Japan. So when I wanted another beer and I was in an izakaya and someone taught me okawari, gold, got it. I felt the need to express that, and then someone gave me the language, and that's how you learn language, I think. Sorry.
Bob has a question.
Bob.
Well, it was a comment actually, but I do university teaching, but also run my own small school. And some of my most communicative students are adult beginners who know very little, but I've got a lady who'll sort of walk in and say, today, kitchen, big spider, I shout, husband. And, she's sort of, basically, I think she's giving me content, something I can work with. And then, maybe suggest other ways with the language. And I got higher level students who go, demo, muzikashi, wakaran. She'll have a go. She comes in sometimes bursting with a story to tell. And, it's just key words, but she's giving me the material that I can work with. So, yeah.
One of the people, I don't know, who was it? I've got a terrible memory, but in the first breakout room we went to, somebody said that when we're talking about what TBLT is, they were was it Al maybe? Was it you, Al, saying like finding those gaps, right? You were talking about gaps, right?
I said, yeah, you depend and then teach on the post task.
Yeah, right. So I'll just share screen one more time, but
I think Hayato might have said about the gap finding.
Okay, right. So with the 1 minute speech, it's a bit small here, but basically I've found that, I mean, for example, this is level 3 book, so it's a bit higher level. The level 1 would be a lot easier. But for example, talk about a person that you met recently. Like I met my friend, and et cetera, et cetera. But what initially there is, it is a little bit hard. But once they've done it a few times, they start getting that sort of a bit more smooth at it and wanting to try a bit more. And also what we've done is we've put this My Vocabulary thing in. So what they do is they find out what they didn't know. Like we've got a unit on rules, and invariably the word mongen comes up every time. They don't know how to say mongen in English. So they'll all look in the dictionary and find the word curfew and write it in here, and that's a new word for them. And the fact is, they've found that they didn't know that, and hopefully the fact that they wanted to know that now is a little bit more engaging and memorable for them than just me telling them the word for mongen is curfew, please write it down on in your book, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it takes a little bit of time, but to me, I mean, this 1 minute speech idea for me has been,
I can say as a publisher and also as a publisher / researcher, what have you, I actually fought with Justin and Paul about this. I said, like, no, you can't have that. You can't just like dump students in there. And we had long discussions over this. And of course I lost, or I gave way, or whatever. But it seems that it's very, very important, because one of the cool things that Justin and Paul added to that 1 minute speech is if you can take them to the end of the unit.
Oh yeah, can I? I don't know if I have that page.
Well, basically, the end of every unit, it's doing that 1 minute speech again.
Yeah,
and I think that's just great.
That was actually a Jane Willis idea. I met, as Paul mentioned Jane Willis a few times earlier. When she looked at an early version of the book, she said, "This is great, but why don't you have them do it right at the end again and just see how far they've progressed?" So that's a brilliant idea. That's why you're Jane Willis and I'm not. But yes, it's kind of serves a double purpose. It has them go back and do it again. They've improved a little, perhaps, but also a bit of repetition as well. So yeah.
Couple of questions. A question about the L1. While encouraging learners to use their own linguistic resources, what are your thoughts about L1 usage? I'm tend to be slightly more liberal on the L1 front. I think that ideally you can make tasks where students will forget about, will be almost forced to use the L2, but the L1 can be a really useful resource. So there's a ton of research that shows that L1 can really support students. And again, gradual gradation. It depends on the level of the students, and it depends on the class. You get those classes where you get the good student who just seems to always use Japanese, and I will take some students and go, could you, when you speak Japanese, you everyone else is just falls into using Japanese, a bit of flexibility, I think. Justin, what do you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I definitely don't stop it like directly. I do try to encourage them to use it as much, and especially actually the 1 minute speech recently, especially, or actually always, just for this one moment, just make sure you don't use any Japanese. Just try to get by 1 minute. Come on, guys, you can do it, kind of thing. And they usually can. The one thing at the moment, of course, is the new world that we live in, unfortunately, means that you can't really see what's happening when they're doing it. Zoom has has the bonus of having, you know, the breakout rooms as we've used today, but you can't for 1 minute go around 10 breakout rooms and see that that's happening, but I just trust that they might be.
There's actually lots of questions that have come about. So let me start with John Ossine's question, which was the difficult part of putting together your textbooks, balancing the TBL approach with providing enough language to complete the tasks? Was the back of booking the way around this dilemma?
Yes.
The back of the booking was just a really great way of maintaining that TBLT approach. It kind of also tied in with the assessment that Al briefly mentioned, that you can also then assess students on the back of the book material. It's actually a bit more concrete, so it allows assessment, but it was a way of maintaining that TBLT approach.
As with everything in life, like the you know, the ideas form with, you know, more than one person sort of thing. And I think it might have probably been one time when Al was saying, but you've got to put some language in it or something. And we probably said, yeah, no, we're not. And then he probably...
I said, you've got to put it, but you can't. I was talking about pure TBLT. You got to have it
somewhere. Yeah. But I think it would have been it was probably a compromise which worked out well, is what I was getting around to. It was probably, we needed to put it somewhere, and the back of the book seemed to be the place for it. And we've taken that on board. We're putting together another book series at the moment, and we're just doing our thing is a back of the book. We back of the book everything.
Right, we're doing a TBLT presentation book if you're interested. Another fast question from Sanaz is, looking at the Willis task cycle and your pre-task and post-task, what are the time given, the time allotted for each of those tasks?
Well, another thing that we wanted to do was we didn't want to have a book that you had to use every unit. And this is, most of writing this was just things I hated. What I didn't like is when I had to use unit 1, 2, 3, because the review after it used all of those units, or the test used all of those units. So I wanted them to be somewhat standalone. Paul and I wanted them to be somewhat standalone. So we've sort of created it so that it's flexible. You don't actually have to have a certain amount of time. If you want to spend more time on a certain unit, you can. I would say that we generally, I think Paul's the same, we spend a 90-minute class on the input cycle and a 90-minute class on the output cycle, and then maybe a presentation or something after that. Might be one class, for example. Within the unit, the task type determines the time. There is no set time. We have a teacher's guide where we say we suggest 5 minutes or we suggest 10 minutes or something, but task type determines time. And also student interaction determines time. You know, I'm never going to stop students if they're talking and they're into something. Okay, go for it.
Okay, I've got just a few more to go on here, but Charlotte mentioned that one of the things about, you've got the task and then you notice the gaps and things, and that the teacher can be Johnny on the spot doing grammar and addressing linguistic issues. But that's fair and fine for an Eikaiwa class, but how do you do that with a larger group of 40 students? How can you do some post-task teaching with a large group?
I would actually say that, and this is a balance again between being, I try not to be overconfident, but I'd say that with a bit of experience, and a lot of people here, I'm sure, have been teaching in Japan for a long time, that you kind of do build up a familiarity with the kind of errors that students are going to generally make. So you can kind of predict with a lot of tasks what the errors are going to be. We all know the go to the shopping, the kind of the errors that are very typical. And often I will just, even in I've done TBLT with 40 kids in a class, and will try to go for the more generic responses. You can't, it is a weakness in that you can't go and address an individual student's weakness on a certain particular grammar item necessarily. But I don't think you can do that with any class. When you've got a class of 40, PPP or TBLT, you're not going to be addressing that. So I don't think that's a unique problem to TBLT. And I do think generally there's a fair knowledge that we have through experience of doing these things of what problems students are going to come up with.
Okay, I've got another question. Actually, Curtis Kelly has joined us. Curtis, you came in a little bit late, so you haven't heard some of our discussions, but Curtis was one of the first task-based teachers when he put out a book called The Snoop Detective School back in the, I guess, the late 80s, early 90s. And we're actually doing a reversion of it. And one of our discussions actually is this: where do you put linguistic input? And I think Curtis wants to have linguistic input in the unit. And I was saying back and forth. That's why Curtis.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, as we said before, the input task is itself the input.
Right.
I should say actually that Jane Willis, actually, she just wrote to me yesterday and said, we were talking about input, and she said, in typical Jane Willis style, well thought out, I don't like the term input. So she doesn't actually use the term input. She uses the term exposure, because she says input is too much like you're pushing it on the students. But she said, I like the way, guys, your input is basically exposure anyway. So, but it's a surreptitious way of getting language to the students, I guess.
Well,
So
Curtis,
like,
I'm sorry, Curtis, you want to address that issue of where linguistic support?
Yeah, I think it really relates to how much the students already have and how much they don't have and what the task is. You know, so we're setting up these like mysteries where students are looking at pictures, and we'd like to have some of the language that they need like a page away instead of having to flip all the way to the back of the book. And we're going to try both ways to see what happens with the students, how it works. But then there's Ellis's case. He says one of his principles is students have to use just their own resources. And I don't think that's reasonable at all for a place like Japan, where you probably have, you know, kids that have almost no resources and kids that have a lot. This is all kind of a big problem, so I'd just like to hear other people's ideas.
Paul, Justin?
I would argue, again, it's about, I would argue first that our students have a large knowledge of receptive knowledge of grammar and a receptive knowledge of vocabulary. There is a large knowledge. I do understand your point, Curtis, that receptive knowledge is not necessarily productive. I also ask kind of expectations from the teacher. For me, the primary thing is getting students to talk and to use. If that's a single word. I've seen the book, the old edition of the book, Curtis, and it looks really interesting, describing where things are, etc. And I think
Can we track down that sort of family sound? I can't see what mic it's coming through.
I think it's Curtis, isn't it? Yeah.
It's on.
Okay. No, and I think it's about what teachers expect, and I think there's this expectation and this pressure on students to produce this like perfect knowledge, whereas language is about communication. If they can achieve that task, even with, and it feels a bit weird, well, they just use gestures, but it was a first step. That's what you do when you go abroad, and you go two of these, right? That's how you start. You go and you get your beer. Sorry to mention that or a bit early, but you get your beer and you're happy and you've communicated. And there's this pressure on students to go, I would like a beer. So beer, is that countable or non-countable? Do I say some beer or a beer or the beer? Or and then they just don't say anything. They go, eto, and it ends, and the barman walks away and serves someone else. So for me, my primary thing is just building up that initial communication. And if they point for the tasks in your book and can do it, then that's it. It's like, wow, you did it. Look, you can communicate. You can get the thing you want using English or using gestures even. So yeah, but it is a big issue, Curtis. It's even amongst TBLTers, there's a lot of debate about where that language should go. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently debating it right now, and we're going to be testing it, et cetera, but it's interesting. Paul and Justin, any word on assessment at all? I think you've touched on it, but.
Justin?
No.
Assessment for me is one of the most difficult, and I have to say one of the weakest areas of TBLT, if I'm honest. I read the latest book by Ellis, Skian, Lambert, Shintani. They have a section on assessment, but they're kind of like, it's an ongoing issue, because if you go by the pure criteria of you pass the task, you've got your, doesn't matter, you use gestures. Well, I teach in a university. That university want me to put students on a scale, not a dichotomy, pass the task, fail the task. They want from ideally from about 60% up to about 95. So how do you do that? And that's where with the book, we made tests, and they're online and they're available for teachers, but they are not purely task-based, honestly, the test. We're required to give our students a written test. So the tests that are there are task-based elements, you could argue, but they're not purely task-based. And the material at the back of the book does serve that purpose as well, to be honest. You've got some vocab, whereas a teacher, you can actually go in and say, learn those words. But Justin, if you talk about how you use the 1 minute speech and the words that the students have
oh well, yeah, I mean that's just another little simple trick to sort of make it a little bit more student centered. As I mentioned before, the 1 minute speech, which any language that's missing from the students' kind of knowledge, they'll sort of work together and they'll create a word list, and then we'll throw that on the board, and then I'll usually use those in tests later as well as part of the vocabulary test. And then as far as speaking is concerned, we use rubrics and things like that, but it is a really difficult area, and it's the part that it seems that everybody realizes this. Another book that came out a few years ago called TBLT in Asia, which was the same name as our conference that we run, had 20-something chapters, 25 chapters or something, into different sections. There were 2 chapters on assessment, and neither of them were about assessment. Well, not really about assessment, not in any helpful way. So I think, yeah, it's the one, that's why I just, don't like to talk about it. It's a very difficult area. And we have a workaround, as Paul mentioned, but that's probably the one area that you can't completely say, well, that's sticking to TBLT principles.
Can I just address the assessment thing a little bit? So what you seem to be talking about is basically tests and giving grades.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of a traditional test. In the testing community, that's called assessment of learning. But what's a major trend in testing is what's called assessment for learning. Okay. And one of the big things here is that the key mechanism of learning is actually assessment. Students have to understand what their strengths and their weaknesses are. So any useful learning task has to have assessment built in, so students get feedback about their strengths and weaknesses. And to me, I think one of the big problems in Japan is that students have this idea that the teacher is going to tell them the correct answers. So they go to class and they sit there and they wait for you to tell them what the correct answer is, and they'll memorize it. And at the end, you'll have a test and they'll reproduce it. So teachers try and do a task-based learning thing. And these students are all sitting there, well, you know, I'm going to wait until the teacher tells me what the proper answer is. They just don't understand why they're doing this stuff without having been told the answer. So, you know, to me, if you're going to be doing this task-based learning, the assessment in the sense of students getting feedback or understanding their strengths and weaknesses really needs to be built into the task rather than being thought of as giving a grade at the end. So what do you say to that?
Paul?
I would say that task-based learning has an element has a lot more of an element of built-in assessment than PPP. Actually, it's interesting that you frame it like that, and it's a lot clearer for me, because by doing a task, what you have by PPP, what you have is, here is the past tense, learn these words, now speak with them. With TBLT is what you have is, you're going to give a past tense narrative. There should be some kind of non-linguistic outcome, but you're going to talk about this, tell a story about what happened to you. Well, the inbuilt assessment comes from, crap, I couldn't do it. I don't know that word. I don't know how to say that. I don't know the word for this. If the teacher provides the language up front, there is no inbuilt, there is no assessment there, because it's like, well, you can assess your ability to memorize and reproduce what someone's just taught you, but beyond that, there's no inbuilt assessment of your knowledge. So to put it in a Japanese context for me, I go to my departmental meetings and I go, and I try and say something and I go, I'm getting immediate feedback, because I'm like, I don't know how to say that. I don't know how to express that. I sound like a 5-year-old child when I speak Japanese. And by using the language, no one's told me what to say. I'm getting that inbuilt assessment. Whereas PPP, I don't know. If you tell me the phrases to use at this meeting, then I use them and everyone claps. Well, I don't know. Could I have done it? Can I do it really? So I would say TBLT does have that element of it a lot more, actually, of students being able to judge how well they do something.
But there is also a reality, for example, at our university, we have a period at the end of each semester that is assigned for a 45-minute to 60-minute, it's like that detailed, 45 to 60-minute paper test that students must come in and do with a pencil and in all classes kind of thing. And so we also have to face that reality at the same time, you know, sort of thing. And that's what we're talking about, probably.
I was also going to say that our current circumstance where we really can't test,
yes,
and we're all doing formative assessment, kind of is what we possibly should be doing with TBLT, is formative assessment week by week. My question bank is empty. If someone else has comments, please put them in the chat. Or Curtis, off you go.
Okay, sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background here. There's a family party going on, so I hope you can hear me, but I'll ask very quickly. So let's say you had a TBLT lesson on telling a taxi driver where you wanted to go, that kind of an interaction. Could you have a test where you just have a dialogue sort of based on that same kind of thing that you'd done in one of the classes, and they have to fill in a line for doing something that they did in that particular TBLT activity, and then just evaluate whether that would be effective. You know what I mean?
Get your mic and give it over to Paul and Justin.
So I'm kind of struggled a bit there. I think the difficulty is setting up that outcome of like, could the student, if you have a test where they've done some kind of, the task is telling someone where to go, in a test, technically they could just write, I don't know, Shin Osaka, please, and then they've passed because maybe they did it. Maybe they were able to convey the meaning. I'm not sure if I'm addressing you exactly there, what you meant, Curtis, but I think that's the difficulty, is that technically, yes, well done, you achieved the task, but is that enough? And how do you grade? How do you set people out on a grading system? That you, then what tends to happen is you get to the linguistics and people go, well, he said Shin Osaka, please, so he gets a C, but he said, would you mind taking me to Shin Osaka if it's not too much trouble, governor? And he gets an A because that's perfectly appropriate taxi language. So yeah, I'm not quite sure if I've answered your question or not there.
Also, if I could ask, Charlotte's written a fairly detailed question. Charlotte, would you mind turning your mic and camera on and making the question for everyone?
You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to put all of the, connect everything here and trying to get good understanding. So I'm hearing like TBLT, there is no pre-input, right? But rather, as Jane Willis wrote to Justin, that it's all about exposure. And then I was listening to what Paul was saying, just getting them to speak. And that exposure means really like exposure to pidgin English, right? Especially when you're dealing with the A1 learners. So the students are being exposed to pidgin English and gestures. And then we come through with a teachable moment, which is not directly referenced in the book, but somehow I have to pull that from somewhere, right? On the whiteboard or on the screen. But having taught that generic teachable moment, do I then, in the TBLT framework, do I then get the students to do it over again, having now received input from me? Or do I just move on to the next task?
That's where task rep, and we didn't really talk about this, and this is something that's hard to put into a textbook per se, but task repetition should definitely come in. Everyone in TBLT agrees that if you give them that teachable moment, exactly as you say, Charlotte, if you go, okay, well, you should have said this. Okay, moving on. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. When am I gonna? So that's where task repetition is definitely something that should be built in. It's why, as Justin mentioned, the 1 minute speech, you deep end the student. And then at the end of the unit, you go, try that again now. And you've given them the resources. Actually, that's no longer a pure task in that sense, in that you've given them the language. And there should always be lots of repetition built into a task. My feeling, Charlotte, is generally in the Japanese education system, and I saw it when I was teaching in junior high school, it's like, okay, chuichi, this grammar, this grammar, this grammar, this grammar, move on. Chuni, and if you in Chu-san suggest doing the past tense, oh, no, they did that in chuichi. Well, they might have done it in chuichi, but they need to repeat it again and again and again and again if they're going to kind of get there. So, yeah, we try and encourage task repetition, and we tried to create tasks that naturally have that repetition. And this is the difficulty in a textbook. What ideally you would do is for a lot of those tasks, you would stop the kids and then you'd say, okay, now I'm going to give you a bit of language. Now try that again with another partner. Definitely, that's a really good, important point, I think.
Why didn't you have that written into the textbook? Why isn't there it on the pages in the textbook that you like stopping the kids and having a teachable moment and getting them to do it again? Why didn't you have that guidance in there? because people are not so familiar with TBLT, right? I'm not, yes, I'm here, right?
Kind of hard with a textbook that's supposed to be for students. Technically, the language in a textbook, we do try and put that in the teacher's book, I think, do we, Justin?
Yeah, we do. One thing about the difference probably between a book like this and a book like Lift Off from before. When I say Lift Off, I think of the actual names of the books I had to use. But the difference is that this will actually take some work on the part of the teacher. Sort of it doesn't, you can't just pick it up and go into the classroom sort of thing and go, here's your language for today. I'm the teacher. I'm going to tell you these words. And, you know, that gives me my sort of central stage to do what I want to do. There is some work involved in getting used to it, I think. And I mean, we have a teacher's book that tries to help in that sense. But TBLT in general is like that. It's not just this textbook. It takes time, and it takes sort of a little bit of dedication to kind of being wanted to do it, sort of thing. It's not just, yeah.
And I would comment thusly is that when teachers go into a meeting or a classroom rather, they've prepared it. They have the teacher's books, da 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 da, and yet through tasks and things, we put the spot demands on the students, and yet the teachers are super prepared. The students are, oh, what's going to happen? They don't know. And so what TBLT does is put the spot demands on the teacher. So all of a sudden, they don't know what's going to happen. So they're kind of in the same situation then as the student. And so they really don't know what's going to happen.
It's been called, Ellis says it's a weakness of TBLT in a way that it requires some teacher training. Yeah, hard to put something like that into a book. And it's something that definitely, if we write if we update it, Charlotte, it's a really good point. I'd like to actually try and in some way manipulate to just build that in as much as we possibly can. But it is a bit of a new approach. It takes teachers out of their comfort zone a little bit. I mean, you open a book on the first page of the book and you're just so used as a teacher to seeing all this language, and you go in and it's like every textbook I can think of has the pictures and the vocab to start, and it's a nice intro. Well, you come to the book Justin showed and you've got, okay, warm up, 1 minute speech, talk about a person you met recently, go. Well, you've immediately, the teacher's going, whoa, wait a minute, can they do this? Is this okay? I'm not. So it is definitely a different approach, and challenging, I think, to a degree.
Just to clarify I'm sorry, I don't, Saturday nights I can't talk very well. When I mentioned the difference between input and exposure, it's basically nearly the same thing. It's just a different way of looking at it, I guess. I think what Jane is talking about is input in the sense that I'm giving you this language. Please be aware that you are going to use this language, she would call input, versus we're going to do this thing with some language, which would be the readings, for example, in our book. That's exposure. It's sort of as I said, a surreptitious way of providing language support without overtly providing it, I think, is the difference, perhaps. And that's sort of what she's meaning by exposure. That's probably not even necessary for today's talk, probably. I don't know what threw it in there, but basically that's the difference. It's overt input. Here you are, use this, versus here's some language. Let's look at it, and now let's do this thing with this language, kind of thing.
I've got a comment from Bill who says that his understanding of reading Willis and tasks is that a final presentation. So having that final presentation is when students polish up their language to make a presentation. So having that final presentation is important for, what can I say, creating this push to learn language. Bill, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that was my understanding of it. But it's been a while since I heard them talking about it.
So Justin and Paul, do you have comments on that?
That's built in. That we most of our tasks have some kind of report back. I do agree that the argument is that when you ask a student to sort of report back, they're going to focus on speaking accurately. So even in the task, they went birthday, January. When it comes to report back, they'll have to say, in this class, my birthday is September, but actually in this class, only one other person has a birthday in September, and it will make them focus on and do the language. So that's actually, I think most of our tasks, if not all, have some kind of report back. That's a key part of the main task cycle.
In that thing that the Willis framework, it's written there, but it's very small and basically unreadable at the moment. But yeah, it's part of the Willis framework. Also, Bob's comment about the 4-3-2 approach. That's always a classic for repetition. Sort of like just, I mean, it's a most people will be familiar with it. But you start off with 4 minutes, then you do the same thing in 3 minutes, and then 2 minutes, and just getting you're repeating, but you've got that time limit kind of gamification nearly to it, which is nice.
And can I add that you'll often get that. In the second repetition, it will be better than the first, and the third will be better than the second. They'll even correct their own mistakes while doing it. Yeah. So it is a very fruitful exercise. It's a classic and useful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Also, there's a mind reader in here as to what textbook I was referring to, because it's exactly one of them, one of the two that. Anyway, but I didn't say it.
The Christmas party is coming up, but if there's any questions before we have some joyous refreshment. Charlotte, please. Yeah. Your mic's on. Mike, mute.
Very quick question. So can this work when you have a cross-institution course, when it comes to end-of-term assessment?
So like for a unified program, you've used it in a unified way at Kindai. How have you done assessment?
We have the as I said, the tests, there are tests for each unit. It does require some coordination, because you'd have to make sure that if you're going to use it as a standardized thing across all of the units, then
across all of the classes, yeah,
I can't speak either. If you're going to use it as a standardized thing, you'd have to make sure that everyone has covered the same units, and that everyone has at least done the language that is the focus at the back of the book. But it would work, and it does work in that way. Yeah. Bit more becomes less purist, because you have to be more, again, it's the reality versus the ideal. You have to be a little bit more like, make sure you cover this language, because we are going to test that kind of thing. But yeah.
Thanks, Charlotte. Any other questions before we hand it over to Steve and Bill again? Thank you. Curtis?
Where will I be able to get the recording of this, since I was asleep too? I was sleeping at the beginning.
It'll be on the FukuokaJALT.org website.
Right. And I forgot an important thing, sorry, but I've given my email already. I'll do it again, al@abex.co.jp. I can give everyone digital access to our entire catalog actually tomorrow if you want. I'd say right now, but I'm looking for a beer actually pretty soon. But if you send me your information, I can get you a digital. We've got all of our books online, and you need a password and a book code. I'll get that to you. If you want to see the actual book itself, we're happy to do that. We'll send off books on Monday. So all you need to do is give us your name and your address, and we'll get books sent off on Monday.
And since we're sharing things on the chat, I'll put the BuzzFeed article to Brother Orange. If you've got a few minutes later on.
Actually, Matt was
pretty good read.
Guy to get in touch with. He was like so chuffed that we were going to be doing a textbook about this. He was super excited.
Well, I've enjoyed, Alistair, you running the show. I don't know why you want to stop now. And also, I wasn't aware there was a rule against drinking beer already. So sorry, everybody.
20.
Okay, well, yeah, that's why we have our camera off option. I hope the students never take advantage of that for that reason. But
yeah, but turn off the recording when you start the drinking. I just went somewhere quiet.
That's right. All right, everybody, shall we thank sincerely our two presenters for tonight? With at JALT, we all turned our microphones on to clap, right? But yeah, okay, it's very visible. Everybody's recording. All right, great. And we have a long chat here that I will make sure to save and get on the on our website, along with the video of this event, which I shall now stop recording. Here we go. Click.